This is a large bank. This is a small bank. This bank is going out of business. This bank is beating JP Morgan in return on equity and assets. It's called Broadway Federal Bank, and it's a community bank.
You might not guess it, but while big banks are in trouble, small banks are doing just fine.
In fact, it's the big banks, those with more than $1 billion, that are 7 times more likely to fail than the small banks, those with less than $1 billion. What's the difference? You could sum it up like this. While the big banks in Wall Street went crazy, the small banks didn't.
Did you go crazy?
No.
Why not?
Because we weren't involved in subprime lending, and the primary reason we weren't involved in subprime lending is because we didn't believe it was appropriate to put people in loans they couldn't afford to pay back.
This is why community banks are good for us. They offer what's called relationship banking, where your banker knows you and you know your banker.
Instead of taking money from places like China and sending it to places like Merced, California, they take money from people like Mrs. Henderson and lend it to people like Mr. Jones. Or let George Bailey explain.
Well, your money's in Joe's house, that's right next to yours, and in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can.
When people are borrowing and lending within the same community, everyone has an obvious stake in the game, so people are careful. Plus, small institutions get involved in their communities. They lend to small businesses. They support civic groups.
So now that we're remembering what's so great about small banks, Washington is putting community banks front and center in our economic recovery. Right, Phil?
Wrong, TA. Our bailout money is going mostly to big banks. And JP Morgan says it plans to buy more banks.
Yes, big banks caused the current mess, and they're the ones getting all the help. What's up with that? Big banks getting bigger only increases the distance between borrower and lender, which was the problem in the first place.
That's not good. What can we do about it?
I suggest that Washington stop favoring the big guys. Give the little guys access to money too. Play fair. Set up a community trust fund. The community banks can draw for it. Pay for it with a tax on the very transactions that got us into trouble in the first place. A tax on so-called securitized transactions.
I see. So let's simplify. The next time JP Morgan wants to bundle some loans, chop them up fine, and shovel them over to some nutty investors, they've also got to kick in a few bucks to help fund community banks. Is that the idea?
You've got it.
Great. What a quick study I am in this highly scripted video. So let's sum it up. Little guys, community banks, thrifts, credit unions, good guys. So don't punish them, celebrate them. Above all, help them.
Community banks can help us become smarter savers, smarter lenders, and smarter borrowers. It's time Americans relearned the thrifty habits that brought us prosperity, and community banks can show us the way. I'm Phil Longman at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C., with a big idea about small-scale banking.
And this is T.A. Frank of the New America Foundation, weighing in from California.